AMD did relaunch the 5800X 3D at a price that is frankly offensive. It's a slap in the face to consumers and absolutely shows you that AMD is not the good guy on pricing. They will absolutely take advantage of any situation they can to milk consumers of their money because they're launching this at a higher price than CPUs that from AMD that already perform better. So they're charging more money for less performance, specifically because they know that there is a certain corner of the market that might buy it anyway. And that is what this video is about. So basically, I want to acknowledge this is offensive pricing, but if you're on an AM4 motherboard with an older CPU, it's possible that this might be your best option for a CPU upgrade if you have to upgrade your CPU right now, which you really need to look at in your gaming experience right now. Are you actually suffering from CPU limited performance so extensively that you really need to upgrade? Because this is an insulting price, but it is potentially a significant performance uplift for your build that does not require you to buy a new motherboard or new memory. And those are the people that AMD is trying to milk with this relaunch. So I was curious also if there was any like re-reviews of the 5800X 3D. To be clear, I'm not a CPU reviewer, so I don't do CPU benchmarking. I don't have a bunch of CPUs to compare against or any of that. I did notice that Tom's Hardware did some new benchmarking here, but quite frankly, it's like the exact opposite of what I personally would have selected if I was going to be taking a look at this as far as CPU choice to review against. So I understand what they're doing. They're comparing it to CPUs in the current market at a broadly similar price point. However, those are just not the target audience. The target audience for this CPU is somebody who already has an AM4 motherboard with an AM4 CPU and compatible DDR4 memory and is going to consider this as a drop-in upgrade to avoid buying the new motherboards. So in my opinion, the only actual interesting CPU on this list that gives us information that's kind of relevant to those buyers is the Ryzen 7 5700X right here, because that's the kind of CPU that somebody might already own and be considering this as an upgrade. So in that case, you're looking at 145.6 FPS versus 107.8 FPS. And if we divide those, you're essentially looking at a 35% performance uplift if you upgraded from the 5700X to the 5800X 3D. So it's about a 35% uplift. Now, also let me justify the claim that this is like an insulting price. So by the way, just lots of flashbang warnings for this video because every time I flip back to this Amazon page, you're gonna get a white background and blinded, so apologies. Anyway, so what am I talking about here? So we can see that if you wanted to go with something like a 7600X 3D for $230, you would be getting significantly more performance from an AMD CPU, also an X3D CPU. So AMD themselves are offering you significantly more performance for significantly less money, but they know that if you went that route, you would have to be buying a new motherboard and, more importantly, new set of DDR5 memory, which would just be raking you over the coals in the current memory crisis. That's where they know that you are caught between a rock and a hard place if you want a CPU upgrade and you already have an AM4 board. Also on the Intel side of things, for example, right now, the 270K Plus is actually at a really attractive price on Amazon. It's not $350, it's about $265, and it's getting 165.6 FPS in this test. It's significantly faster than that 5800X 3D. But like, let's throw together the cheapest possible 270K Plus build, and you'll see why this is a problem. So first, let me just show you, okay, that this is available on Amazon right now for $265. You get faster gaming performance than the 5800X 3D and absolutely crushing it in multi-core productivity performance, absolutely destroying it in that regard. However, Let's say you want to buy this, but you have an AM4 motherboard. So you're going to have to buy a compatible motherboard because it's not going to slot right in on your AM4 board. So if I sort motherboards low to high, I don't even care at all about the quality. I just buy literally the cheapest possible motherboard that could even slot in the 270K plus. That is $100. Okay, not the end of the world. We're now at basically the same price as that 5800X 3D. But we're getting the additional performance and all that, so it makes sense. Okay, but now you have to buy that DDR5 memory, and now we're in a bit of a problem. So let's say that you wanted to really skimp on memory and just go with a 2x8 configuration and live with 16 gigabytes of system memory because of the dark times that we're living in. And if you do that, and you just buy the slowest possible memory, well, at least the cheapest possible memory, regardless of speeds, you're coming in at $200 at current pricing, and that brings this upgrade because to get this CPU, you need the motherboard, you need the RAM. Now we're at $565, so we're over a $200 increase over just slotting in that 5800X 3D, and that's where AMD knows that they have you. Also, a lot of people on an AM4 build might have already had actually 32 gigabytes of memory because memory for a long time wasn't really that expensive. So if I wanted to compare this to going with a 2x16 to get 32 gigabytes of memory, which might be what's comparable to your existing AM4 build, well, it looks like the cheapest possible option right now today would be $350. So that brings us up to $715 to get this modern platform with 32 gigabytes of memory. And like I said, literally the worst possible motherboard that you could slot in. I could do a similar demonstration using one of AMD's CPUs like the 7600X 3D with a cheap motherboard and 32 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of memory, and we come in at similar overall pricing. So like I said, that is how AMD arrived at this price point, and that's how they'll get you. But sometimes something is taking advantage of you, but at the same time, given the reasons why, you can still then consider, okay, am I just going to buy it anyway? So let's explore that now that we've established the pricing, right? Because the 270K plus, significantly better CPU for significantly less money. The 7600X 3D, significantly better CPU for significantly less money, but memory and, really just the memory pricing, but you do also have to buy the motherboard, suddenly makes those upgrades off the table. So that's why I said, somebody might be coming from something like a 5700X, in which case your motherboard is likely compatible with the 5800X 3D. I mean, double check there's no funny business with the BIOS situation that's available for your particular motherboard. You can probably slot this in. Also, the X3D CPUs are famously not very sensitive to memory speeds. So even if you have fairly slow memory, the 5800X 3D still stays at roughly the same performance, or it falls off a lot less than most non-X3D chips do. So, like I said, that is getting you a 35% performance update. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people on a AM4 build might have actually a slower CPU than the 5700X and get even more of a performance uplift from that. Now, a lot of people might be on like a 5600X. Now, this is going to take me down a little side path where I just complain about trying to actually use like Google's AI for something that it should actually be good at, because I don't like generative AI and things like that for like trying to replace art and things like that. The one thing you feel like it should probably be good at is just helping you search the internet for a specific thing that you ask it for. But honestly, it hallucinates so much, it's absolutely useless when you check the sources. I just wanted to find the most up-to-date benchmarking of a 5800X 3D that also included a CPU like the 5600X that somebody might actually have. And then first of all, it told me that this article that I'm telling you about right here includes that information, which it doesn't. but it also hallucinated a bunch of other reviews that literally also don't include that information. Then I actually tell it that those reviews don't actually include both the 5600X and the 5800X 3D in their charts. And then it also, it acknowledges that it's hallucinating. And then it gives me some other options, like, for example, this hardware unbox /TechSpot review, which is actually a link to a Gamers Nexus piece, which, by the way, doesn't actually focus on the CPUs that I'm looking for. So it's not only hallucinating what CPUs are in this review, it's actually mislabeling the outlet that's actually doing the review, which is just offensive. And then when I really still try to call out that it's actually still wrong, it once again gives me another option, which, by the way, it calls a hardware unboxed 20-game benchmark, but it's not a hardware unboxed review. It's got the site wrong again, which I call it out on. This channel isn't even hardware unboxed, but you called it hardware unboxed. And now it's saying that this was actually testing games, not hardware unboxed, which, by the way, it wasn't actually testing games. It's still wrong. Oh my goodness. So I don't know why I kept arguing with this thing. But guys, this is why memory is expensive. It's to get access to this kind of wonderful technology. Isn't this so amazing and useful that it's absolutely worth memory prices going insane? And like just... So anyway, this is why memory is expensive, because we need server farms to feed up this kind of quality information where, like I said, of all things that you would hope that AI could be good at, it would be literally just searching the internet for specific information if you tell it exactly what you're looking for. And no, you check its sources and they are wrong. It hallucinates the name of the people that you're looking for. It's just kind of worthless. Now, I mean, one thing that I was able to pull up is at least a somewhat recent TechSpot article that included the 5800X 3D with some other CPUs than are on this Tom's Hardware list, including CPUs like the 7600X, which gets roughly the same performance. So that does mean that if you find reviews that have a 7600X in them, you can kind of use them as roughly a broadly similar, although not identical, performance to the 5800X 3D. So then if we look at other TechSpot reviews, these are same benchmarks that come from Hardware Unboxed, by the way. They're written articles go over to TechSpot. But anyway, you can find benchmarking like this that has a 5600 up against a 7600. And remember, the 7600 is broadly equivalent as a stand-in for the 5800X 3D. So you're seeing like going from 150 FPS to 203. But actually, this particular review brings up another thing to consider if you are looking at doing this kind of an upgrade. Because remember that with CPU benchmarking, when you're looking at these performance differences, they're intentionally using low resolutions and extremely powerful GPUs in order to create CPU bottlenecked scenarios in order to highlight the maximum difference that you could see between these systems. But just remember that in your actual use case, you might not actually be CPU limited, in which case the upgrade is even less useful. So if you're on something like a 5600, but you have a GPU like a 6650 XT, then note that if you upgraded to our 5800X 3D stand-in, the Ryzen 5 7600 here, you would see very small gains on average because most of the time you'd be GPU limited rather than CPU limited. Sometimes you will be CPU limited, and that's why we do see some improvement. And usually in actual gaming scenarios, it's really specific areas in specific games where you're gonna see the CPU limitations kind of hold back your performance. Oftentimes this is in areas where there's a lot of NPCs, or if you're in multiplayer gaming, when you get a whole bunch of character, multiplayer people, I should say, not characters, like in that same area, or sometimes you're in a scene where a bunch of physics happens for whatever reason. So there can be specific scenes in specific games that tend to be CPU limited. Also, if you tend to game at lower graphics settings and lower resolutions, use a lot of upscaling to try to chase high frame rates, that relieves the burden on the GPU, can make you become more CPU limited. But yeah, you can see that if you're on certain levels of GPU performance, you're just less likely to benefit from the CPU upgrade. Now, that being said, if you're trying to upgrade your whole system, being able to slot in like your CPU and your GPU, if you're on something like a 5600X, then going too far beyond something like a 6650 XT, that's similar to like an RTX 3060 or something like that, especially if you're on a 1080p display, you might start to, not benefit as much from a GPU upgrade, where you might also want that CPU upgrade, so you could then upgrade the CPU to then have more room to stretch your legs onto a better GPU or something like that. So there's a lot of things going on here, but this is definitely something to consider, is this kind of scaling idea, where if you do end up dropping in this $350 upgrade and just expecting all of your games to be like 35% faster if you're on like a 5600 or 5800X or something like, or 5700X, those kinds of CPUs. Like I said, just remember that you're not always CPU limited, so you won't always see that full benefit. So anyway, this is kind of a bit of a random sort of rant video about this launch, because like I said, I want to be clear that the pricing here is offensive and taking advantage of consumers who are put in a hard place because of data centers wanting to produce this kind of garbage hallucination output. Yay. But it's happening. So that's what we get. That's the situation we're in. AMD knows that, and they are looking to get as much money as they possibly can out of it. But being the world that we're in, if you are chasing a CPU upgrade and you're on an AM4 platform, sure, certainly there's better value CPUs out there, but they would require buying into more memory, which puts you at a much more expensive overall build. So it is what it is. I'm just giving you guys the picture of what upgrading actually looks like if you're on an AM4 build. This might be something to consider if you are certain that you're actually CPU limited enough that you really would benefit from this upgrade and you don't want to wait. And we don't know when things will be getting better. A lot of the predictions are still showing many more months, if not years, of this going up, but nobody actually knows for sure what is happening. But anyway, hopefully you guys found this rant/informational video still somewhat useful and or interesting, and I hope that all of you have an excellent day.